This is an RNZ podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Your Money with me, Mary Holm. Thanks for taking just a few minutes to listen in while Jessie Mulligan and I talk through some useful ideas about how to make your money work better for you. Just remember though, this is guidance. Final decisions are up to you. Over to Jessie.
And time for our regular appointment with personal finance expert Mary Holm, who joins me in the Auckland studio. Hello there.
Hello, Jessie.
You can listen back to our podcast. We podcast all of the conversations with Mary, and we go back a few years, Mary and I. So if you've got a financial question, chances are we've covered it. And today, you've been thinking about retirement income.
Yeah, but first of all, just congratulations on a new baby, I understand.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah. And is this number 4?
It is, yeah.
Because I noticed you made a comment half an hour ago where you said something about people, 4 babies is too many.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, yeah.
There was a knowing comment for people who were paying attention, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Going very, he's a beautiful little boy, little scout.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so last week on Friday, spent the day at the University of Auckland at what's called the Retirement Policy and Research Centre there. And they had a day-long conference they had about 20 people speaking about different facets of retirement income, which some people would think, oh my God. But I found it very interesting actually, and I hope I've picked out some aspects of it that will interest the listeners.
Please, yeah.
Kris Faafoi was there in his capacity as Minister of Consumer Affairs, and so just to start out with what some of the points he made, he's particularly concerned about the growing inequality in New Zealand, as many of us are, the income inequality and wealth inequality. Talked about the need for a massive culture change. He said we need to be talking about money around the kitchen table. Money is not a dirty topic, which I thought was, a totally valid point. And another thing that he said that I was a little bit surprised about, somebody asked him what his attitude was to raising the NZ super age. And by the way, somebody mentioned that in Japan they're considering raising it to 75, which is awfully old. But and Faafoi said that's off the table. He said, Labour, before this last election that they won, the previous 2, of course, they didn't win, and they talked at those stages about raising the retirement age, and he said we live in a political reality, and so at this stage it's apparently,
it's quite depressing to me.
It is, I think so too. I mean, he absolutely said not on my watch. I haven't heard Labour saying that specifically.
No, Ardern said I'll resign if the retirement age goes up.
Oh, did she? Oh, I missed that one. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's that politically damaging. I think a lot of New Zealanders half expect it. All the talk that's ever been about it is that they'd bring it in very gradually, only hitting people who are currently aged early 50s or younger. So they wouldn't be suddenly saying to people at 62, hey, you're going to have to wait. So anyway, we'll see about that. That was just one interesting point that came up at the conference. But one sort of, in a nutshell, the very broad aim of what people there were about, I thought was presented when somebody talked about lifetime consumption smoothing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit technical, but what they're basically saying is that ideally people can spend as much on their living, on everything, spend the same amounts when they're working and when they're retired. That's the kind of ideal. So you've saved enough and perhaps got a home paid down so that you can continue the same sort of standard of living in retirement.
That's very appealing to me, that idea.
Yeah. And,
because there'll be times when I'm retired and I've got no money coming in and I'm thinking, man, I remember the life when I'd just go out willy-nilly, buy lunch whenever I wanted to, take away coffee when I didn't even really feel like one. Yeah,
but out of habit, yes, quite. And I think, if people are, getting in and saving a reasonable amount and ideally heading for a mortgage-free home by retirement, or, as we've discussed before, saving a big amount of money to cover their accommodation in retirement, there is no reason why people who kind of get their act together reasonably well can't continue their standard of living into retirement. But another big topic, as you'd totally expect, was talk about New Zealand super. And one speaker was talking about how poor people over 65 are in New Zealand. And I thought this was really interesting. About 5% of people over 65 are, by one definition, in poverty, whereas children up to age 17, it's 38%. So it's 5% of old people versus 38% of kids. And that speaker said if in early life you're in poverty, most kids don't ever quite catch up after that. I mean, some do, of course. We know the stories of the people that did very well arising out of poverty, but most don't. And so the point is that there is a lot bigger worry, a lot more cause for worry about children than old people. Having said that, a lot of old people rely totally on New Zealand super, or of all the people over 65, 40% of them manage on New Zealand super plus less than $100 from elsewhere per week. So they're living largely on New Zealand super. And of single people over 65, 40% of them have got no other income other than New Zealand super. So New Zealand super is enough to keep people out of poverty for the most part, especially if they've already got a mortgage-free home. Yeah, but it's not a huge amount. And then people at the conference talked about whether we can afford super in the future, and that's such a common worry. And Matt Bell from the Treasury was talking about it, and what he has to say is pretty comforting, I think. They tend to measure New Zealand super projecting into the future what might happen in 20 years and 30 years and 40 years, which is what Treasury does. They look at NZ super as a percentage of the gross domestic product of New Zealand, the sort of total output of the country. And they say that, sure enough, because the population's ageing, which we all know about, the baby boomers coming into retirement, that there will be a bigger percentage of gross domestic product spent on super, but it's not growing as fast. It's not projected to grow as fast as they thought 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The problem is looking not as worrying, and that's largely because their projections of what's going to happen to gross domestic product are growing. They think, the economy is going to get bigger. The numbers are already there for the people that want New Zealand super. We know about them. They're all alive already. But the sort of variable thing is whether the economy grows. And it looks as though it's going to grow faster than they used to think it would, partly because more and more old people are staying in the workforce. And that's been a big change. The numbers, just since the 1990s, the percentage of people over 65 staying in the workforce keeps increasing, especially for women. There's still more men than women over 65 in the workforce, but that gap is narrowing. And they said of people in their late 60s in particular, about half of them are in some kind of paid work. It might not be full-time, but it might be part-time. But that's a big trend that I don't think was necessarily foreseen like 10 and 20 years ago. The interesting question which was raised, and I don't think there's enough data on it yet, is whether people are continuing to work because they feel they have to, because of money, or because they want to. I think looking around at people I know, it's quite often a bit of both, actually. They quite enjoy their work, and they might perhaps not work so many hours, but they quite enjoy it. But they also think it'd be quite nice to have a bit more money, So it's a bit of both going on, but that's a really strong...
We have expensive taste these days as well, don't we?
Well, yes.
International travel and nice wine and takeaway coffee and cafe lunches.
A lot of retired people I know, it's where are you going this year? And sometimes it's more than one international trip. There's a heck of a lot of that, yes, and going to lots of plays and lots of concerts and all that stuff, which is pretty neat. There was also discussions about whether attitudes are changing to older workers, and some sort of optimism that there might be a bit more respect for older workers, because there's been common complaints that older workers are the prejudice against them.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's a sort of growing feeling that okay, they might not be as quick at picking up the technology perhaps as younger people, but there are other aspects that they perhaps also less likely to take sick leave and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah. And another trend is that people in their retirement are quite often setting up a small business of their own, whether it be tutoring in something that they're good at, or mowing lawns, or whatever. There's a lot of that going on. Matt from Treasury also talked about health spending, and he said yes, of course, spending on health's rising, but that's not. It's not necessarily, it's partly because of the boomers coming into retirement, but he says every country around the world, as it gets richer, they spend more on health. And that's always going to happen. It's kind of, if you have got more money, you do spend more on health, so let's not get too upset about that, although they've got to keep monitoring it, I suppose.
Sounds like quite an optimistic, positive speaker from Treasury.
Yeah. I think their message for quite a long time has been that we don't need to make drastic changes. A lot of the Western world is worse off than New Zealand in terms of the baby boomer problem. We've got quite a high, relative to them, quite a high birth rate. Quite a lot of people having babies, particularly Maori and Pacific families actually are having more babies, and so the ratio of old people to younger working people is not as worrying. And
that's important because we need the working people to pay for us older people when we turn 65.
That's right, we do. Yes. Turning to health, a couple of other things that came up about health and old age, which I thought also. Look, I'm an optimist, Jessie, so I think I'm plucking what I was interested in out of a whole day, and there probably could be another person who attended that conference who could come out really gloomy. But I like looking for the more positive stuff.
That's why you and me get on so well, Mary.
Well, that's right. Yeah, we're just two little Pollyannas is exactly right, Jessie. Yes. But life expectancy is growing, and it keeps growing. The gap between Maori don't tend to live as long, and Pacific is somewhere in between Maori and Pākehā. They're both growing. The Maori life expectancy is growing, and so is the Pākehā. Unfortunately, the gap is still there and not necessarily closing. Nonetheless, for everybody, we're expecting to live longer. And one thing I thought was really quite neat was that for the average person, the proportion of their retirement where they need daily help with the sort of daily living is only about a quarter of their retirement. So I think younger people kind of picture retired people, needing lots of care. But for most people, the average person, it's only about a quarter of their retirement is spent like that, and three quarters is spent. Well, especially the first half of a lot of people's retirement's doing what you were saying: lots of travel, lots of shows, lots of books, lots of everything that's good in life, really. Dementia numbers are growing, but that's only because the number of older people are growing. The likelihood of each person getting dementia is decreasing, which is what you kind of expect. There's more research being done on it. One comment that I thought was interesting and not necessarily positive: men versus women in retirement. Men have more preventable and treatable non-communicable diseases. So they've got these diseases, they're much more reluctant to go to the doctor or to get help with it. And so they've got these things that are preventable or treatable. They're not doing enough about it, and so they tend to die younger. So, it's probably up to the men to some extent to...
Yeah, non-communicable diseases, heart disease, diabetes...
stroke, and a lot, most...
Diet and lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, not many old people have communicable diseases, actually. Cancer, of course, is another non-communicable.
Yeah.
Or they nearly all are. Yeah. Just getting on to what they call decumulation, which is basically spending your retirement savings. It's the opposite of accumulation, which is the saving. Somebody said, I thought it was quite a good quote: people are more worried about living too long than about dying too soon. And so, and that's quite sad that people are thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to run out of money, and too many of them end up dying with quite a lot of money in the bank. Susan St John, who's one of the economists who was running the conference, she was saying we've got to encourage people to use more of their capital, not just spend the interest and returns on their retirement savings, but eat into their capital. And she and others were pointing out that people are feeling less pressure now to leave an inheritance to their kids. And that's partly because by the time they die, the kids are quite often in their 60s. With this longer life expectancy, mum and dad are dying in their 80s and 90s. Kids are in their 60s. They don't really need the money at that point. There's probably more of a tendency for people to give money to their kids when they're younger to help them get into a house or something like that, rather than letting them inherit it later. One big worry about people spending
Do you think
money...
we should tell our parents that we don't need a inheritance,
Yes.
not to worry about it?
Yeah, I think that's a lovely message.
Look after yourself.
Lovely
spend
message.
it yourself.
Yeah, I think. Yes, I think. I mean, because
Some people really. This is pretty unrelatable to me, but some people will really plan for the inheritance, right? I mean, that's part of Plan A.
You do hear it, and it's a bit dangerous because not all parents are necessarily leaving. But I mean, it's very common for parents to leave their home, or they might do a reverse mortgage, but that won't necessarily take all of the home out. And so kids. But it'd be really actually quite good for families to have a fairly honest conversation about this, and
Around the dinner table.
Yes. Going back to Faafoi's talking about money around the kitchen table, where the idea is, look, we might as parents give you kids some more help in your young adulthood to get into a home, but don't count on too much when we die.
Yeah.
And just for everyone to understand that. One of the worries, of course, is about home ownership, which is high amongst people above 65, but it is falling and is tending to fall across New Zealand, across all ages. So, there's worries. They're saying that the cost of renting is higher than the cost of home ownership in retirement. And when I first heard that, I thought, what? That doesn't make sense. But, of course, in retirement, people tend not to have a mortgage. And so they've got rates and maintenance and so on, but rent can actually cost more than that. So that is something people are worrying about. And another point...
We've got about 1 minute, by the way, Mary.
Have I? Okay, so let's go quickly here. The government really does need to get in and help set up annuities or some other kind of program for people, some other way for people when they've got a lump sum in retirement, probably in KiwiSaver, how they can plan to spend that through their lifetime with products called annuities. There's a strong call for the government to help set those up because private enterprise kind of fails when it does that for all kinds of reasons we haven't got time to go into today. Maybe
annuities.
We can another time.
So okay. So you give them all your money and they pay you a certain amount each year to spend
until you die.
Yeah.
And so if you die
and they
young,
invest it over the right sort of.
And there are private companies offering them, but there's various reasons why that's not a great idea. We should talk about it some more in some depth because I wanted to just very quickly say that New Zealand does well on the world stage in a few ways. One is that there's less pressure from the ageing population, which we talked about because of the birth rate, but there's also New Zealand Super gets praised widely on the world stage because it's universal. So, for example, women who haven't worked because they've been raising children get as much as people who have worked, which is unusual on the international stage. And the other thing we're getting praised for is the automatic enrolment into KiwiSaver. Other countries around the world are watching that and copying it because it's getting a lot more people into retirement savings when they're auto-enrolled when they get a new job. So that was, stuff that worked well. And all in all, as I say, I think there was quite a lot of good news there as well as bad and a lot of stuff for people to be thinking about. Yeah.
The minister will be impressed with the notes you took, Mary.
Will he? I hope so. Yeah.
You must have been a good university student.
Yeah.
When you were at what was it, University of Chicago?
All and Vic and Michigan. But I've been a reporter all my life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was just being a reporter again.
You would have been the sort of student I would have said, hey, any chance I could borrow those notes?
And I would have said they're half shorthand and they're half my own shorthand and you can't understand them, sorry.
Yeah. To find some other sucker then.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
It's a pleasure, Tess.
If you came in late for that, by the way, Mary's been talking about retirement income trends, ideas and predictions, and you can listen to it back from the beginning. head to our website, rnz.co.nz/Jesse, and that'll be up in a few minutes.